On this episode of NorCal News Now, we're speaking with U.S. congressional candidate for California District 1, Audrey Denney. I'm Mike Richman.
And I'm political consultant Aaron Haar.
You are political consultant, Aaron Haar.
It says it there. Yeah.
It does. It says it right there. I'm looking at it. How are you, man?
Must be true.
Yeah. How's your hat?
Doing good. Doing good.
We're going to brand that hat
Doing
for
good.
you, man. All right. Well, our guest today on the show is Audrey Denney, who is longtime listeners of the show will remember from her previous appearance here. She is one of the rising voices in the North State Democratic Party with a background as an agriculturalist, educator, and instructional designer. But enough about the resume. What brings her here today is that she's running, of course, for the Democratic nomination to face Doug LaMalfa at the polls this November. So, Audrey Denney, welcome back to NorCal News Now.
Oh, thrilled to be here with the two of you gentlemen and, of course, the hat.
Yes.
It's lovely to see the hat again.
Yes.
Yeah, we like that. The hat is...
They make me wear it, actually.
We actually do. But, all right. Well, Audrey, here on the show, we talk to people like yourselves, newsmakers, activists, candidates, all those types of high-profile people. But one of the things about politics today is that people kind of tend to talk like politicians a little bit, right? I mean, they kind of don't really let it fly. Mm-hmm. And we kind of try to avoid that a little bit here on NorCal News Now. So as we get away from that, we want to start with a little curveball, if we can. With
I'm
you.
ready.
Okay. All right. So we'll start by curving. We all have our flaws. We all have bosses. We can all be in bad moods, whatever the case may be. Spouses, friends, and we all make mistakes. But if we were to ask our friends about you, your friends about you, okay, what do you think would be the one thing they'd say that really kind of drives you up the wall? I mean, what really gets you fuming?
That is a great question, Mike. Actually, this week I had the chance to be surrounded by some of my very best friends. I was at a work trip, one of my last work trips I'm going to be taking for a while, and I was surrounded by 20 of my best friends. That's my life. I work with my friends. And one of them was a good girlfriend I've had for 19 years. So she's known me since I was, the math's hard, a freshman in high school. And we were talking about this in one of our team building sessions. We were talking about, what in the work environment makes you mad? And I couldn't think of anything because I, of course, see myself as very mild-mannered. So I asked her, and I was like, Angela, what fires me up? What makes me mad? And she, more quickly than I would like to admit, rattled off a list of scenarios in the pretty recent history that she's like, well, you got fired up about this and this and this and this. And I was like, whoa, take it easy. But we dug in a little bit, and I realized that all of the scenarios, all the situations she was describing were scenarios where I had perceived that there was an injustice somewhat in there, or I had perceived one entity or one party was being prejudiced against another party. A good example that she brought to my attention that I didn't really remember was we were working with a company, with a nonprofit that helps smallholder farmers in East Africa utilize more sustainable practices. And we were designing some curriculum for them, and I'd been tasked with the job of incorporating some subject matter expert feedback into the curriculum. And one of the subject matter experts had left a comment in the Microsoft Word document, and this really got me fired up, that I took offense to because they were saying that the people wouldn't understand that, that this was going to be too complex for them to understand. And having worked abroad, having worked in those contexts before, I can't fully understand, but I can see their reality. And I know that they have complete ability to understand these concepts and complete ability to teach us as Westerners what we need to know about this. And so I remember just getting so angry and firing back this email to this person, and they can understand this and you're judging them. And so that, I feel like that is really indicative of the times that I get angry, is when I see injustice, when I see people behaving in a way where they don't take the time to listen or honor someone else's experience. And for me, the very, very core of that, the very core of who I am is this deep belief that we're all inherently equal in worth and dignity. And that means that smallholder farmers have the same worth. Their lives have the same worth as my life. That means that people in Siskiyou County have the same worth as people in Butte County, and that we're all inherently equal. And so that is such a driving force in my life that when I feel that violated, whew, do I get fired up. Watch out, world.
Do you think that has a kind of a resonance for what you're doing now? Because I think there's this tendency to think that, politicians can parachute in and solve problems for people that are on the ground. But you really can't do that from Washington for people here really in District 1, right? You really have to kind of walk in the shoes of the people who really understand what they're doing.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we've been doing on my campaign the last 10 weeks. It's only been 10 weeks. But every single day I'm in a different part of the district, and I'm listening and I'm learning from people and seeing what their lives are like and trying to put myself in their shoes and trying to understand what their lives are like. And just in that simple act of listening to somebody and listening deeply and listening authentically, that is a service. Because when people feel heard and they feel seen and acknowledged, they feel like they have a voice in the system. And there's so many of us across the North State that feel disenfranchised with the system and see that the system is broken. And so when we as public servants can listen to people, we can show them that they have a voice and that their voice matters, and hopefully inspire them to use their voice to get out to the polls and to make real and lasting change.
All right, Audrey. Recently, I was down in San Diego for the Democratic State Convention, and we didn't come up with an endorsement for Dianne Feinstein for senator or anyone for senator, and there was other races that there was no endorsement. It was a popular pick, actually, but before even going down there was not an endorsement for this race. But is that something you really wanted? And I kind of said during the show that I'm starting to think it's a little absurd because candidates are actually spending a lot of their resources trying to get that nomination, that endorsement. Is it something you wanted? And then I kind of have a follow-up question with that.
Yeah, you bet. I got into the race 25 days before the pre-endorsement caucus where the vote was held. And in 25 days, I managed to earn 25% of the vote cast. I did not go into this race expecting to be able to make up enough ground to be able to get the pre-endorsement. And so for me to get 25% of that vote right away was a big win. And whilst Dianne Feinstein did not get an endorsement, you are looking at one person who did get an endorsement down there. The California Young Democrats at a statewide level endorsed my candidacy as their choice for our district. And for me, that was a really powerful moment because this is the arm of the state party that represents all Democrats age 35 and under. And so to figuratively walk out of San Diego, I wasn't there. But to have the door shut on that convention with me earning that endorsement was a big victory in my eyes and a big honor. And I'm excited to keep working with various chapters of Young Democrats in the North State to push forward my candidacy.
It's a big deal. I got word of mouth around to me at the convention because I'm sort of separate from that group. But it was they got the Democratic Party did endorse. Well, I found out it was the Young Democrats, but it's still an incredible
Democrats nonetheless.
Yeah. Let's start talking about this because this is a big thing. And Connor Lamb just recently won in Pennsylvania. And, there's a lot of buzz because that district is red plus 11. And we have the exact same district based on we are a red plus 11. Now, to me, there's a lot of factors that differentiate the two. But quickly on social media, it's like, wow, we could do this. We could possibly do this. But in order to do that, you talk about the percentage you got there, you'll need a percentage of independents, you'll need a percentage of moderates, and possibly some Republicans to side with you. It seems like that's maybe what Connor Lamb got, and maybe the type of campaign he ran. But I guess what I'm saying is, how are you feeling with that? And what are like three things you would say to those independents or some of those people that are on the fringe and not sure about either party?
Yeah, I got to be honest, I was floored when that happened. Connor Lamb is 33. I will be 33 for a few more days. And so my youth has been a point of conversation over the past 10 weeks. And I love to tell people that I have decades to serve them in Congress when they send me there. But seeing someone who is so close to my age also get elected in this manner was really exciting. And while I don't think that, the Pennsylvania 18th is exactly like our district, there are some similarities. And my big takeaway from that is that Democrats can win in every single district across this country. And we're going to take back the House this year. And it's not just taking back the House, but it's the sheer magnitude and the way that we take back the House. And by having Democrats win in districts like Pennsylvania's 18th and California's 1st is going to show the rest of the world that we are not who sits at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and we still are a country with some semblance of moral authority. And so for me, that was really, it's been a really powerful week and a really inspiring week, and it allows me to get my team fired up and saying, hey, we can do this, and we can do this year. In terms of what I tell moderates, NPP voters, some of our disenfranchised Republicans in the district is threefold. And the first part of it is we need change. We need change in Washington. The establishment on both sides is not working for us and is not getting things done. The second thing that I tell them is that I'm one of them. I get what they want. I understand what they want. Not that I'm a Republican and not that I'm an NPP, but I understand the issues here. And I've heard from people, and the issues here that are affecting them are healthcare. Healthcare is too expensive. Their kids can't get educations to prepare them for their future. The tax system is rigged against them and is threatening their Social Security and Medicare. I understand those issues, and those are the things that I would work for, and that's the vision that I have for our district. So Washington needs to be shaken up. Yeah. I hear them, I see them, I care about the things that they care about. And the third thing that I would tell them is, I will be beholden to you and no one else. We can't get anything done in Washington until we get corporate money out of politics. We have to fight that and give people back the chance to make their voices heard and not corporations. And so, my campaign isn't taking any corporate PAC money. We're just taking money from individual donations. And when I get to Washington, I will aggressively fight to make sure that we can get corporate money out of politics, so we can tackle this agenda put forward to make life better for the people that live in this district.
What you're talking about really is an authenticity about yourself as a candidate, and the things you believe in, and the things that the constituents here in the district are talking about that matter to them. And I think that the lesson of Connor Lamb, was about authenticity. Now, he had a message that resonated with that district. As they say, he was very well meshed with that district in terms of running as a candidate. And you are here too, but you can't necessarily take the lessons of that, I don't think, and graft them onto your race, because again, there are different districts, different people that make up that. But the question I really have for you is, we talked a little bit before the show started, is, how do you kind of coordinate what the constituents are telling you are important to them with what your core beliefs are, right? Because you need to maybe bend a little in some ways, but there's certain core things that you can't bend on, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to touch on a couple of different things in there. And the first thing is that when I get to talk to people and listen to people, I get to share every day my character and the parts of me that make me me. And that's all scaffolded around this framework of an inherent belief in the rights and dignity of all people, right? And so that is the core part of my being that will never change. And that's deeply rooted in my progressive faith tradition. That's deeply rooted in my human rights formation. That's just kind of who I am, and who you're going to get if you elect me is a person who will treat everyone equally under the law. That said, that same human rights perspective that I bring pushes me to see and pushes me to hear how people are experiencing their lives in the district, and how their government can work to make sure that their human rights are provided for. And I love talking about human rights on the campaign trail, because so often we think about it in terms of our international treaties and our international peacekeeping missions, and how do we make sure that we're using our economic powers around the world to ensure human rights in other countries. But right here in District 1, we are experiencing human rights violations on a daily basis, because people don't have an adequate standard of living. People don't have universal health care. They don't have the education that they need to be successful. And those are all things that are enshrined in Article 25 and 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so when I go out to these rural places to talk to folks, the same issues are coming up. And those are the same issues that are core to my campaign, that are, how do we make sure that people can get good, dignified jobs in our community? How do we keep our friends and our families safe from the natural disasters that are coming our way? And how do we make sure that they get the health care that they need? And so for me, campaigning is about not changing my messaging or trying to tell people what they want to hear, but it's about authentically listening about what would really make people's lives better, and then figuring out a way that the government can help do that.
I don't want to kind of get you away from your message, but I mean, when you say those things, and I'm like, that's so logical. That makes sense. Who could not be for that? But Doug LaMalfa isn't necessarily running on those principles. I mean, what is he running on? I mean, he would say that's not that I'm running on responsibility and liberty and people's rights and all these things. But I mean, that may not be true, right? I mean, there's reasons why people are Republicans. There's reasons why people are Democrats. So, why is what you're saying, why does that make more sense, do you think? Why is it a better fit for the district than maybe what LaMalfa's message is?
Well, let's step this back a second, because when we're talking about Republicans today, and we're talking about Republicans in leadership, we're talking about Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan, and their entire interest is to give tax cuts and tax breaks to their wealthy donors. And that's full stop right now, the agenda of the Republican Party that's controlling the House and the Senate. Okay, so if we can set that aside and then look at the actual Republicans who live in this district, we see people who believe in small government. They don't believe necessarily that it's the government's role to do these things that I like to talk about. And those are the conversations I love to have. I find myself often at a dinner table with a libertarian rancher from Modoc County, or, a forester from the Susanville area. And we get to have enlightened conversations about the role of government. And we get to talk about social safety nets and who should pay for them, and should we have them, and should we cap Social Security or should we not? And we get to have these amazing kind of policy conversations that are important to have. And that I love having those conversations with Republicans. But when we're talking about Representative LaMalfa walking lockstep with the Trump agenda, or we talk about the leadership in the House and the Senate right now, we're not at a place where that section of the party can have real discussions about making life better for their constituents, because that's not what is on their agenda.
So in speaking with the government, and if you talk to some voters up there, Doug LaMalfa was against Obama declaring Bears Ears and some other monuments protections under the federal law. And that was sort of a big deal to him and some voters. However, the Trump administration this week has decided that they're going to raise Shasta Dam, and they don't care what the state thinks, and they're going to do it anyway. Article in the LA Times a couple days ago. Basically, Westland's water district, very powerful, one of the largest water districts in the state. Very powerful. Their head, chairperson, who was a former Republican Party member, he brought Trump out here in 2016 and wooed him down there, and then they brought him up to Reading, and now that person has been appointed to take care of projects for the Department of Interior. And the project that person wants to go forward with is the raising of Shasta Dam, which will in turn help Westland's water district and some growers in the Central Valley who have some almonds and some different crops. But that is I don't want to steal the question from you. I haven't even asked it yet. But that is, Oroville's sort of a resident, it's for residential use, but Shasta Dam is an agricultural use, and they want the public to pay for this, and they want the public to pay for this project. And that project was a New Deal project back in the day, I believe. Taxpayers around the country got together because we really needed some jobs here, and we really needed some agriculture economy, and we did it. It was a great thing. But we have a limit set for the state of how high we can have a dam, and it would be breaking state law. So it's sort of a two-part question of how do you feel about Shasta Dam? Because it's a discussion. Some people are for it. Some people are against the raising of it. There's a beautiful, pristine river behind it that would be impacted. It's protected by the Wild and Scenic Act, which they would have to do away with that act in order to do this. So some very extreme environmental things, some very extreme expensive projects to the taxpayer. And ultimately what I see is Westland's Water District stealing the part of it. So, how do you feel about Shasta Dam, and how do you feel about the government kind of overseeing states when the states don't really approve the project?
So the deeper that you dig into this project, into what's going on right now with this, the more enraged that you will see me get. And this harkens back to our first question around injustice, because not only is this designed to benefit the Westlands Water District, House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy is frantically putting an amendment into the appropriations bill that has to come out before next Friday, to make sure that the Westlands Water District doesn't have to pay anything for this infrastructure project. And so that really fires me up for a number of reasons. But it goes back to, when we take a step back and look at it at a broad level, our district is resource rich, but we're poor. We have water, we have timber, but 7 out of our 11 counties are in the 15 poorest counties in the state. Our median average income for a family is like $47,000, and the state is like $63,000. We're not doing well up here, and people up here feel forgotten. They feel left behind, and they feel, with good reason, like our resources are being stripped away from us and sold literally down the river, for other people's gain and for the enrichment of the richest among us. And so when I have conversations about water, I like to start and remind ourselves that water in California is a public trust resource. The California Constitution, Article 10, declares water a public trust use resource that will be used for the greatest benefit of the public. And for me, when I look at that, by the way, a couple weeks ago, I swore an oath to support and upholds the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California. Frame that when I'm talking about
during
this.
During
my paper signing,
they
make you sign an oath. It was amazing. Very big moment for me. But so I really, really encourage us to be thinking about and looking at water policy through the lens of it being a public trust resource. And so if we're selling our water off to Southern California or to the Westlands Water District, and they are making millions and millions of dollars off those transfers, and we're not keeping any of that in this part of the district, to me, that is an injustice and a big problem. So I believe that we need to be reframing how we think about these transfers and these issues. We need to make sure that our water needs in this district are met. And we do need to be selling water. We do need to be transferring water. But the beneficiaries of those transfers have to be the communities and the people who live here. Orville's a great example of this. We're selling water it's going down to DWR, through DWR to all of the different state irrigation districts that are purchasing it and making money off of it. And yet the folks who live in Orville are at risk of a dam failure. They don't get discounts on their water. They don't get discounts on their power. FERC projects all over the country do, but they don't. And so really starting to look at how we can make sure that we capture some of the benefit of our resources and keep it here in the district is really, really important to me. To answer the first part of your question about Shasta Dam specifically, we need to look at conservation before we look at infrastructure, and we need to look at repairing old infrastructure before we look at building new infrastructure. In the same appropriations bill that we're seeing come through next week, they're slashing some of our conservation programs in terms of water. And I believe that's criminally negligent. And it comes from not understanding or not believing the fact that we are going to experience longer and more severe droughts. We're going to experience more and more different types of extreme weather events that are going to put us all at risk. And so moving forward, not only do we need to look at water as a public trust resource, but we have to be thinking about how we update our state's water infrastructure system to be flexible. We're using 19th century solutions for a 21st century problem, and we need to have a flexible and innovative and adaptive water system to account for some of the challenges that are going to be facing us with climate change.
Yeah, and it's amazing. You think about everything we have here in the North State. You alluded to it, and Aaron talks about this a lot too. The paradox of plenty,
The resource curse,
is a big
paradox of plenty.
Is a big.
It's a good word for it.
Yeah,
And we did a lot of research on that, and look it up. The paradox of plenty, the resource curse. And basically, it is. We're the sixth largest economy in the world, and we have some of the poorest districts in the country up here.
Makes no sense. Yep.
So there's a lot of places this happens. It's the mines in Rwanda. Everybody around them is very wealthy, and they are extremely poverty. Sinclair, Wyoming, where the largest oil refinery is, they pay the highest price of gas. This stuff doesn't make sense to me. So, yeah, I can feel up here where there is a sense of wanting to break away a little bit. But there's different ways to do that. I mean, especially with this dam project, I mean, there's so many. There's Native American tribes up there. They have land that could be impacted. There's this pristine river. You're basically going to add 20 I forget how many stories are going to add to this thing. So you don't take a building from the 1920s and put another building on top of it. That doesn't. I mean, I'm not an engineer, but that sounds safe to me. Especially when you're forgoing the permits, when you're possibly forgoing some of the environmental impact reports, and I don't really trust these engineers on the government projects, especially when we have failing dams across the country and failing infrastructure, that they're just we just had a bridge just fall in Florida. So these new construction projects seem to be, and it's happened here when they did the 99 overpass, they had bridge fall in effect. So there seems to be some construction failures on how they're doing these things. But I'm all about union jobs. I'm all about creating some good jobs. And it seems like, we don't have coal mines here, but we're not going to bring back gold mining. But dams historically have brought some, jobs and some good paying, work assistance here. And a part of it has been a jobs program. Definitely Shasta Dam was part of that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think about it from the perspective of the paradox of plenty, where we have all these natural resources. We don't have the infrastructure in terms of a business infrastructure. I mean, these days you can work anywhere. If you're a knowledge worker, you're in IT or whatever the case may be, you can work anywhere you want in the world. And why not want to work in the North State? It's beautiful up here. This is one of the most beautiful, pristine parts of the world. I mean, it's amazing. So why can't we attract more business here, small business that'll grow into medium-sized business? I mean, those are the jobs we need and we want. Yeah,
I think we should be able to too. A big limiting factor, though, when you get out of our urban hubs of Chico and Redding, is the lack of connectivity.
That's a big problem. Yep.
Folks are disconnected without cell service, with very limited internet capabilities, and so some of those jobs that you were talking about require that kind of technology. That's a big issue we hear about when we travel around, and something that I believe some sort of public-private partnership could address and could work towards. A big thing for me when I think about jobs in the North State is thinking about and talking about career and technical education, because we have specific needs around our district of specific technical jobs that we can't get people trained up for fast enough. We don't have a really good workforce development program that's preparing the next generation of young people to step into some of these places. one of the biggest things that's surprised me that I've learned in the past 10 weeks is the state of our forests. And I was up in Susanville a couple weeks ago, and I was talking to foresters up there, and they said, we don't have the people trained up to be heavy equipment operators to do the sustainable forestry management that we need to keep our communities safe. And so how do we make sure that we are investing in the career and technical education of our young people to make sure that they can step into those jobs? Not all young people want to go to college. The ones that do, I absolutely think we need to figure out a way to make sure that college is more affordable for them. But for the majority of folks, they want to get a good paying job. They want dignified work that they like, that allows them to stay in their community. And so I think really investing in our career tech ed programs around the district and investing in our sustainable forestry management practices around the district is a no-brainer in terms of job creation, in terms of appropriate resource use, natural resource use, and in terms of climate change mitigation, which is a whole nother thing that we could talk about. If you wanted to ever talk about climate change and agriculture, are the things that I like to talk about.
Let's get into that, because that's a good. We'll go off script. Why not?
I love it.
So what is it about those topics that drives you, that really makes you want to connect with people and help alleviate those problems here in the North State in District 1?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have really the heart of my campaign and the heart of my platform is around figuring out how we can regenerate our rural economies and how we can make sure that the 99% of our district that's rural is thriving, and there are jobs for young people, and that we can raise our median income. We can make sure that 1 in 4 of our kids aren't living in poverty. That's really the vision that I have. And I believe that regenerative agriculture and regenerative forestry is an amazing way to do that, to invest in our economies, to create jobs, but also to mitigate climate change, which is the largest threat facing humanity, bar none. Even if today we stopped use of all fossil fuels, we would still see over the next 100 years drastic and devastating climate change ramifications. And so we need a way to mitigate and to sequester some of the excess carbon that's in the atmosphere, and store it in the soil where it's actually a benefit to life.
The Republicans, Doug LaMalfa, will tell you that doesn't exist, though.
Yeah.
That this isn't an issue. It's something that we need to be worried about. We need to be not suboptimizing our economies through worrying about something that may or may not happen in many, many decades.
And that is the number one reason why you have to vote him out of office, and you have to vote him out this year. And you need to replace him with someone who, A, understands the science, but B, has an active plan and platform in place to make sure that we can mitigate it. And that person is me.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird, because the farmer's oath is to leave the ground better than you found it. So it's like, he doesn't want to leave the planet. I mean, they've gotten so far away from that conservative, because there was a time that conservatives were for conserving things like the environment. I mean, some of our clean water acts have come from Republican policy, whether it be from Reagan, or Nixon, or
Earth Day started under Nixon, sure.
So I don't know why because it's almost like they've gotten to this strategy of they're running against environmentalists, they're running against liberalism.
Well, I mean, you can't forget about the fact that big oil is certainly a major contributor to the Republican Party, and I mean, there's a lot of dirty energy that is of interest to keeping the status quo the status quo. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, but no, because when the Sierra Club in 2005 brings him in 2009 brings him evidence that the Oroville Dam, the emergency spillway, is out of compliance, and he takes that and says, well, that's from the Sierra Club, and goes on to talk about them as kind of damaging them years later in an environmental ad, or in an ad saying, these environmentalists are coming here.
Fairy shrimp? Isn't that
it could have been, I believe that was maybe me, the fairy shrimp question. But the point is, John Muir was one of the most spiritual and God, believing men, this country, he could read I read the Bible front and back, he could recite it. And he after being just a student of that, he went on to just kind of walk in the woods and figure it out and wanted to be as close as he could to God's wonder. So I don't want to go to Christian radio here on everybody, but
watch us get on a soapbox.
He is a man of God, Doug LaMalfa, and but why the disconnect from God's creation?
That's a tough question.
Oh,
I'm going to save that one for Doug when he comes on.
Yeah, I've got
let's talk about faith a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, you're led by your faith. I mean, and what was I thinking? The question of if Doug LaMalfa or someone did talk to God, would they ask him to heal the planet for us? Like that sort of thing. If because I've heard this from Mike Pence, and I've heard this from different leaders. So yes, God spoke to me, and this is the way we're going to go with this. Well, I don't know. I don't know if that generally works for.
Well, I mean,
most people.
I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I know my belief system is that, we as human beings are limited in our perspective. All we can control is ourselves. But I think that certainly God has endowed us with brains to interpret science and understand science, and to not honor the natural world with what and 97%, is that the number we found, climate scientists that agree that climate change is real, to not respect that and take steps to ameliorate it would be foolish and would be, I think, going against the will of the deity. I would think. It would seem to me.
And a matter of national security.
And that too.
Yeah. My faith perspective, I'm an Episcopalian, and it's a mainstream Protestant Christian belief system. But my faith perspective is really what shapes my belief in our inherent equality. And it shapes my belief in all our equal worth. And that's what gives me worth for me as a human, is that I believe that I have worth because I am a child of God. And that could be, that's the language that I use, but people of different faith traditions all over the world use different languages or different words to express that same thing. But for me, how my faith pushes me towards looking at how we as humans interact with creation, as you called it, or the environment, means that we need to take care of it. And we need to not only take care of it, but restore it to make sure that our children and our children's children have a planet to live on. And then make sure that we're respecting it and stewards of this land. And we've been talking about agriculture, we've been talking about climate change and faith. And for me, when we're talking about agriculture and we're talking about climate change, it's so easy. It's so easy for us to sit and say, farmers and ranchers are all conservative. That means they probably all don't believe in climate change and they're just denying it. And how crazy, how silly is that? And it's easy. I feel like it's easy to paint farmers and ranchers with that brush. And I really, really would push back against that, because not only do farmers and ranchers know better than the rest of us, because their livelihoods are dependent on the climate and on the weather, and they see the ramifications and they're feeling the ramifications already. They know that it's happening, but they're getting pushed into a corner. They're getting pushed back because they're afraid that when we paint ag with this big broad brush, that it is contributing to climate change, that their toolbox is going to be limited. Agriculturalists are true environmentalists. They are stewards of the land. But when we say that we're going to take away those tools that you have because we need to mitigate this thing called climate change, you bet that they're gonna get fired up. And so when I talk with, and I do this a lot, when I get to talk with agriculturalists about climate change, I like to talk about how we can actually use the way that we take care of the land and soil, whether it's in our farms or in our grasslands and our public lands and our forests. The way that we can take care of that land actually mitigates climate change. And so when we reframe that problem to them and show them that they are actually the heroes in the climate change story by the way that they care for the land, I find that we get a lot better results than when we say, Farmer Bob, you're doing it wrong, and I, as the scientist, know better than you. So a lot of it for me is framing that and honoring the fact that they are environmentalists, and they are working every day harder than we can imagine to take care of our planet.
That is one issue that really has been one that's been so divisive, this issue of climate change, land use as well, of course. And there's a lot of those issues these days. I mean, it seems like civility has really kind of taken a really big hit, especially with the latest election and what we've seen from the election from 2016 onward. So, how do you deal with it? What are you seeing in terms of is there a lack of civility among the populace, among the electorate that you've been talking to, the constituents? I mean, have you been kind of attacked in some ways? Have people kind of confronted you with things that you're like, well, wait a minute, that's not where I'm coming from. I'm trying to conciliate here. Or do you feel like that's been a little bit overblown and contributed by the media to that?
I would say, I wouldn't use the term lack of civility, but I would use the term brokenness. I was up in Susanville a couple weeks ago. Amazing group of people. Different trip than the time I learned about the forests. I go to Susanville a lot. I'm going back on Wednesday. But I was with the Indivisible Susanville group up there. And before the meeting, they were making great jokes there. There's about 40 of them. And they're like, we got all the Democrats in Lassen County up here. If any of us leave, we got to hurry on back. It messes with the equilibrium. They're cracking me up. But they were, before the meeting got started, I had a couple conversations just one-on-one with folks, and it was like, it's so, the politics are so divisive that I can't talk to my husband about this anymore, or I can't talk to my daughter at all about politics anymore because we were just on opposite sides. And I felt for the first time this real sense of brokenness, and it's mirrored to me the brokenness of the urban and rural divide, or even the brokenness of the coasts of the United States versus Middle America. This polarization to an extreme where families and friends are broken apart. And I got a little preachy that day when I was talking to him, because it was just really on my mind and on my heart to talk to them about how we overcome that, and how we move past that, and how we take time to honor the dignity and the inherent humanity in other people, even when we disagree, and how we take time to look at other people's perspectives. And so a minute ago, I was telling you the story about farmers and climate change, right? And so I was able to take off my hat and put on a farmer's hat and say, this is what it feels like. This is what it looks like from their side. And when we can do that with people that we think are so different than us, then we can start to find a spot of shared common values. And when we can figure out just one thing in the middle of a thorny issue that we agree on, then we can start to actually make change. And so we're so polarized, we're so divided, that we have to start taking these steps towards finding that common shared value, so that we can actually make change. And I think a great example of this for me is the gun safety issue right now. There's nothing more polarizing right now than the issue of gun safety. And so, people on one side of the argument are saying, they're coming to take my guns, and people on the other side are saying, all of this terrible stuff is happening. We have to do something. And so if we come to the very core of that issue and find that common humanity in the middle, the shared value is that nobody wants innocent lives taken at the hands of guns, especially not in schools. So we get there, we agree there, and then we can kind of move outward. And so, yeah, the civility I wouldn't use to describe it, but a brokenness and a polarization is really real. And I want my whole campaign to be about bringing people back together, bringing people together around a vision for what the North State can be. And that's what we talk about every day. It's great.
Do you have a minute to talk about guns?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I have a qualified applicator license for the state. It's a pesticide license I got from the state. A very stringent test it took. It took a good amount of time to study. Lots about nematodes. There's so much in this test you make your head spin. But it was a very significant test, a lot of questions. Once you get the certification, you have to get, every 2 years, you have to recertify. You got to go to seminars. I went to a seminar this week. You got to have 4 hours of laws and regs and so many hours of actual schooling to get your recertification, because I'm spraying these pesticides and these things they have the potential to be possibly deadly.
So you need to know what you're doing.
And there's constantly regulations coming out, and we're constantly trained on these regulations. A new regulation that came out last year was that you cannot spray within 1,000 feet of 1,000 yards, 1,000 feet of schools for restricted use pesticide. I don't use restricted use on it. However, I have to go through all that, and to spray this thing out of my gun, that's toxic and deadly. Why is it so much? Why is it the other way around for guns? And I could be completely nuts. I could just go buy a gun tomorrow. I like that. I like that I have that continuity. It proves that I'm a well-trained person.
You know why there's not? Because there's no amendment that protects the right to use pesticides.
And people aren't there isn't somebody putting $55 million in elections blocking, me from having to get that license and uphold it. But, I think ultimately people would be safer if they had to go through something like that. It would prove the responsibility. That's just me. You were one of I guess what I'm saying is you were one of the first candidates of anyone running in this district to come out right after the shooting and make a statement on it. And it was a broad statement that something has to be different and something has to change, kind of like you've said. But it's a touchy issue in this district. It's a Second Amendment district, but it's also a farming district, and we've had some problems with guns here, which people wouldn't think that it would happen here.
Yeah, and we followed up that. I followed up that broad statement a couple days later with a video talking about it and talking about some of my priorities that I would bring with me to Washington to make sure that our federal regulations match the stringent gun safety regulations that we have here in California. And Aaron, the training issue, that's an issue that was brought to me by some folks on my advisory team that are big proponents of safe use of firearms. I'm getting advised on policy issues from people that agree with me on a lot of things and people that have different views on me than a lot of things. And gun owners are saying to me, hey, you're absolutely right. We need to make sure that we have licensing and safety training, and that becomes part of the system. And so for me, there's a lot of hope in that, because when we can come together and look at logical solutions to these problems, so we can make some headway. But I'm a firm believer in evidence-based policy, and I think one of the first things that we need to do is overturn the Dickerson Amendment to make sure that we can fund the CDC to do gun safety research and prevention research.
Is that David Dickerson? Isn't that Trump's alias?
And in 1996, they passed that legislation to make sure that the CDC couldn't spend money on gun safety research, and so we need to do that. There's also a ton of things that we can do.
It's real common sense things like Fix Nix is John Kasich's Republican, very behind that, to try to get a better background system.
Banning bump stocks, banning binary triggers. There's stuff like this that would be so easy, that have such broad support. Well, that we just need to get it done.
And I mean, let's lay our cards on the table here. There's a lot of Democrats that believe that guns should be abolished. There's a very strong belief system, not among very many Republicans certainly, but among very many Democrats. I'm not one of those Democrats. I don't think any of us here believe that it's the Second Amendment. It's enshrined in the Constitution, the rights to bear arms. But I mean, there are steps towards that, and those on the right would say, well, we can't have any steps towards any encroachment of those rights. And,
slippery slope, yeah.
But I mean, at a certain point, nobody can have a bazooka. No personal, individual in this country can have a tank. I mean, there are already limits. So shouldn't there be some common sense limits that could maybe additionally be imposed?
You can get a tank on eBay, actually.
So I grew up on a farm. I'm not sure if you knew that about me. And I grew up as part of a farming family. We safely and responsibly used firearms growing up. I remember there was one year that we had a herd of wild boar that were coming into the vineyard right when the wine grapes were ready to be harvested, and they were just decimating it. And we had to get a deprivation permit to get rid of, to abate, if you will, the 80 wild boar that were in
80 boar. Yeah.
We were going to the King City
yummy.
Food Bank. I know, right? I got as much carnitas as I wanted. But we were hauling whole hogs to the carnitas food bank every day, and we had livestock. I had cattle that we had to protect from coyotes and baby calves, and so this is the background that I come from, and the lens that I look at this issue with is making sure that we protect the right of farmers and ranchers and sportsmen to use the firearms that they need while keeping public safety front and center, and while we do those things at a federal level that we're already doing well here at a state level.
But I mean, you think about this perspective. I hear this argument a lot from the right about, well, the real reason the Second Amendment exists is to, protect us as individual citizens against government overreach, right? And like a bunch of people in the woods even with AR-15s are going to really take on the U.S. government, right? I mean, it's like, that seems so foolish to me. I mean, that is really an argument that anybody would make. I mean, there's much better arguments an argument for the Second Amendment than that we'd want to protect our rights as individuals against government overreach. I mean, come on, that battle was fought and lost a long time ago, right? I mean, we have a federal government that's in charge, right? I mean, we're citizens of the government, but in a sense, we're not going to overthrow the government as individuals, right? We're not going to do it that way with guns. It would never work.
Well, you're looking at it. Jefferson and the founding fathers were clear on this. They wanted the government to be there to protect people from the people.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. But I mean, the idea that you're going to a well-regulated militia.
People need to be protected from some people right now.
Well, I understand
so
that.
The government needs to come in and do the job.
Right. But I mean, we have government for that. We have police for that. Do individuals, should you or I have this idea that we're going to overthrow the government if the government overreaches? I mean, does that make sense? Is that an argument that makes sense to anybody?
It's alive and well. I don't know if it comes from a certain bringing up. I don't know if it's the tyrannical government thing. I really have never gotten that because I don't see how you're going to do it.
I mean, you do it at the ballot box.
Yeah, we're going to do it in November.
But I mean, you don't do it through being out in the woods with a bunch of.
You look at percentage of gun ownerships or gun ownership of people who have multiple weapons, and the percentages start to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Where you start to look, and while 20% of the people own a lot of guns, and it's kind of like 80% of the guns. That is that's a scary thing. So now who's that turns into a well-regulated militia to a not well-regulated militia of well, now this is a problem. But it hasn't been. They have their ways. They have the government they don't trust. But then, what happens? What happens when somebody gets a hold of those guns and from mental illness? What happens when somebody steals those guns? So to me, it was always, you're going to get your hunting license. You're going to learn. You're going to be responsible, and that responsibility. So it's a great responsibility. Just like driving and different things where there's other people's lives at stake. Lots of auto thefts in our cities right now where guns are being taken out of cars. Don't leave your gun in the car. So it is a problem. There are too many guns. And really, when people say, well, the problem is this, problem is that, no, the problem is easy access for people to have weapons. And then a bigger, I think a bigger issue to look at is money in politics. And this is the driving force behind why we can't get anything done.
Yeah, and that's a big, you mentioned it yourself. I mean, that really is a big divide right there, money in politics. And you're running, as you say, you're not taking any corporate money. That's
beholden to no one.
Yeah, beholden to no one except for the constituents of District 1. I was about to say that besides the people who voted for me, but the fact of the matter is I am beholden to every single person who votes for me, and I will work to represent the interests of everyone who lives here, including Representative LaMalfa when he's back in Richville.
Yeah. Hopefully very soon.
You don't call it the fighting first for nothing.
Let me ask this question. This is another curveball. We're kind of coming up to the end, but I wanted to get this one in there because I think it's interesting. We talked about North State. The state of Jefferson is a big thing that we hear a lot up here. A lot of folks believe that, given the differences in the North State between what we have up here versus what the Bay Area is like or Southern California. How do you feel about the state of Jefferson? Do you think that's something that is a legitimate goal? Do you think it's something that is at some point going to be a reality, or would you fight for that? Would you be interested in it? What do you think about that?
So I think, Mike, it's important to start with this question on, like we started in all questions, is thinking about the perspectives of the people who are advocating for that, right? And the folks that are advocating for the state of Jefferson feel forgotten, and they feel left behind. They feel ignored by Sacramento, ignored by Washington. They feel like the southern half of the state is stealing our resources. And so I think it's important to start there and look at that and look at what I believe the roots of the problem to be. 17% of the folks in our district are living below the poverty line. Only 1/3 of our district has an associate's degree or higher. The system isn't working for a lot of folks who live here in the first district. And so I believe that California is stronger together, and I would hope that we stay as a state together. But I think it's important to recognize and honor the frustrations that are causing people to want to be their own state and work at a state level and at a federal level to make sure that we can address some of those underlying issues.
Yeah, the motivations rather than the
yeah.
reality of the state of Jefferson. What is driving that state of Jefferson desire among the people that are really proponents for it?
That's what I think about it.
Yeah.
Could you make a deal for them? I mean, because it seems like the leadership that courts them, they haven't done anything for them really. So they know that there's a continuance of courtship there, that they can always go to them and say, well, keep fighting. But it's an interesting group. And another interesting thing is like the county of Shasta, which is very important to you because it is a very Republican, it's the highest percentage Republican county for you working in there. But that county passed marijuana. And I mean, and it's like doing really well.
Yeah.
Like they're not having problems and they're making a lot of money. And I'm kind of confused by that, Mike, of like, how is this area that pretty much goes almost 70% Republican, but it was one of the only areas to pass marijuana legislation and now has small business, jobs, a year's worth of revenue coming in 3 months. And
I'm not sure marijuana is a partisan issue anymore. I mean, is it? I mean, it was always this idea that it was a hippie left wing,
Well, if they can get behind, so I guess my point is, if they can get behind something like that, I feel like those, then we can start working. We can start, now we can start having discussions, because if ultimately they're about jobs, they're about opportunity, and they're about smart growth, then maybe we can, sit down and make some better opportunities for us.
And is that really what it comes down to? I mean, really just pursuing those opportunities regardless of where they come from, do you think?
And it starts by showing up.
Yeah.
Right? And it starts by showing up and saying, hey, we're not here pushing our extreme left agenda, and we're not here to make you exactly the same as us, and we're not here to take away your guns. It starts by us showing up and saying, hey, we want to make the North State better. We want to make sure that your cities don't go bankrupt. We want to make sure that there are jobs in your rural areas. We want to make sure that our dams aren't collapsing and that our young people can get a good education and that you don't die because you don't have health care. It starts by showing up and talking about the things that matter. And so I'm excited to get to the parts of our district where the state of Jefferson mentality is prevalent, and start and talk to them and sit down and say, this is who I am and this is where I'm at. Who are you? Where are you at?
Well, that's going to be our show. Audrey Denney, thank you for joining us again. Really appreciate you coming aboard.
That was it?
That was it.
We're done?
Yeah, that's our show.
Man.
We're going to have you back again, though. We have not more time today, but we'll have more time with you, I promise.
Audrey, thanks so much for taking time on your busy schedule.
Yes.
Come talk to us.
I love hanging out here, and I love getting to have exciting, unscripted conversations.
Very
with
much
the
so.
two of you.
Definitely today. So thank you for that. And don't forget, all you out there, NorCal News Now is available wherever you download your podcast. So check us out and subscribe. We can also be found on Facebook at NorCal News Now, where you can post your comments and suggestions for upcoming podcast topics and guests. So thanks all of you for listening in. We'll be back soon with another episode of NorCal News Now. So long.